G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to show you how you can permanently loosen tight forearms. More specifically, we're going to talk about the forearm flexors. We're absolutely going to go through a forearm stretch that I think you need to do to give you the best chance of quickly freeing up tight forearm muscles. But we're also going to talk about the relevance of underlying wrist joint capsular restrictions. We're also going to delve into the role of spinal dysfunction as the underlying cause of why your forearm muscles have become tight in the first place. And if we don't consider changing this one thing, which we'll get to at the end of the video, then again, this may never permanently leave you for good. So let's get into it. Before we get into trying to show you how to permanently loosen tight forearms, we need to establish an initial baseline tightness so that you know exactly how tight or loose your forearms feel to begin with, so that once you do each exercise that we're about to get through, you can immediately come back to the same test to instantly gauge whether it's actually done anything. And the way to do this is very, very simple. Because we're doing the forearm flexors, I'll get you to straighten your elbow out as far as you feel comfortable. If you can grab your hand with your thumb at your wrist, and just gently pull your hand back as far as you feel comfortable, obviously looking for anything that feels tight in this aspect of your forearm. What you can also do is you can gently twist your forearm one way, twist your forearm the other way, to go looking for anything and everything that feels tight and restricted. Put that aside and then come back to it after each one of these exercises. So the first thing that we want to try and understand is how much of a role is your neck and upper back playing in the onset of your wrist and forearm muscle tightness. You may not realize, but muscular tightness is a request for help from your brain in some way. It's either to protect something, to support something, or to stabilize something else. And those signals originate from your brain via your neck and upper back. There's specific segments of your neck and upper back that have direct influence over your forearm muscles. And if these themselves are dysfunctional in some way, whether the joints are stiff, whether the muscles of your neck are tight, whether your posture is not necessarily good enough, then you may not necessarily even have overt dysfunction in your neck, but you may see the consequences at the areas that that level of your neck associates with. So what we want to do is, if you can take a ball, and in this case a lacrosse ball, and all we want to get you to do is, if you can find the bump at the base of your neck and the top of your back. You want to place the ball right in the middle of that bump. This bump signifies the junction between the base of your neck and the top of your upper back. And we want to move up and down from that reference point. But once you've found the bump in the middle, we literally just want the ball to roll immediately off the spine onto the fleshy part. Under this area is where the joints of your spine reside. So from here, we then want to lie down on the ball. And again, you can do this up against a wall in sitting or standing, in whatever way feels most convenient to you. Just want to leave the ball here and get a sense of how stiff, tight, restricted, thick, dense, and potentially tender it may feel, although tenderness isn't the symptom that we're going after in this specific instance. And once you've got a sense of how that feels, compare it to the exact same spot on the other side. And what you should find is one side should feel stiffer, tighter, harder, more restricted than the other. We just want to let the ball press in, let your tissue sink onto the ball, let the ball sink into your tissue. Encourage that tissue to give and relax and mobilize. If you can stay here for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever feels comfortable to you. Once you've done that, you can then just move the ball up a little bit to the next joint up, or down a little bit to the next joint below. And essentially from the middle of your shoulder blades all the way up to the mid to top part of your neck, you want to go looking for anything and everything that feels restricted and gently encourage that to mobilize. And what you should hopefully find is, once you've found those spots and hopefully changed them, if you then come back to the exact same movement that you did before, you should instantly feel that there's more mobility and less muscular tightness there straight away. So again, I don't know if this translates on the camera, but I feel like I can push this further into the stretch before feeling some subtle tightness down here. But hopefully what you'll find is, just by finding and freeing up some hidden neck and upper back joint restrictions, you may then give permission for those muscular tightnesses in your forearm to start to release. And we're obviously going to get to some forearm muscle stretching in a second. But before we get there, we also want to take a look at what role, if any, underlying wrist joint capsular restrictions are having on your forearm muscle tightness. So once you've had a look around at any potential spinal dysfunction that might be prompting those forearm muscles to be tight in the first place, we also want to clear out any wrist joint capsular restrictions that might be limiting your ability to bend your wrist, but also asking the tissue that runs over the top of that to also be tight and restricted. response. And a really simple way to do this is with a band. So this is a power band. You can use any type of band. You can use a TheraBand or TheraTubing, but we want to secure it to something really strong. And what we want to do is we want to place it just below your wrist. The idea being that we want to pull the band out as far as you feel comfortable. And I like to block the band just above that, just to stop it from wanting to slide up the wrist at all. But again, just under the wrist, pulling it out as far as you feel comfortable. We want the band pulling in the opposite direction to where your fingers are pointing. And all we're trying to do here is once you've got your hand there, you can sort of screw your wrist and forearm around to really wind that up so that the crease of your elbow is pointing forwards. And then from here, what we want to get you to do is just directly move your entire arm and body weight over the end of your wrist. You can spend 30 seconds, 2 minutes in this position, having the band pull your wrist joint open from the inside, or you can just gently oscillate into the end of that range, prompting any stiffness and tightness in that joint capsule and the joint itself to mobilize. The benefit of using the band is it does gain access to that joint capsule better than just traditional muscular stretching will. And then once you feel like you've found and reduced any of that joint stiffness underneath, we can now go through a really simple way to stretch tight forearm muscles. So once you've taken the time to mobilize any spinal restrictions that might be contributing to your forearm tightness, and you've taken care of some of the wrist joint capsular restrictions that might also be feeding into some of that muscular tightness, we now just want to give you a really effective way to stretch that forearm muscle tightness. And like a lot of these videos, the stretch itself can be anything. We just want to put you in a position that finds the best version of your forearm muscle tightness. As it turns out, it can be very similar to the test that you did to start with. But the difference here is we're not just wanting you to hold this position for 30 seconds or 60 seconds and hope that that tissue starts to release. That type of stretching is very old school now. It's not good enough. What we need to do instead is we need to put you in a position, go looking for where the best version of your tightness might be. And for me, it's sort of there. And from here, what we need to do is we need to activate and tense up the area that feels tight. So for me, if I feel tight just here, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to push this hand back into this one to activate that tissue. This respects the fact that your brain is involved here. It gets your brain involved. It creates a reflex that when you tense this maximally for 5 to 10 seconds and then you relax, the tissue will give. And what that means for you is that you should then immediately be able to go further back into that stretch than what you could before repeating that same process for 5 to 10 seconds, then relaxing, maintaining that position, going a little bit further into the stretch, and then consistently following that until you feel like you've either gotten sick of it or you've stopped making change. And then again, as expected, if you come back to the original stretch position, you should obviously feel like it's looser straight away. If it isn't, then you haven't done anything. So we need to make sure that you come away feeling like there's less tension in that forearm for any forearm muscle stretches to be deemed effective. And then once you spend some time freeing up all of those things, your neck, your wrist, and your forearm muscles, we then want to go through a really simple strength exercise to make that tissue more robust and potentially less likely to want to tighten back up again. So once you've found some ways to improve how tight those forearm muscles feel, we also want to go through something to fatigue those exact same muscles to again, try and hopefully replace some of that muscular tightness with muscular strength and better function. And a really simple way to do that is just by using a band. You can obviously use a hand weight or anything else that you feel comfortable with. Whatever exercise you choose to do is very interchangeable, but I just want to show you an example of what you can try and do to give yourself that fatigue. All we're looking to do is with the band, if we just stand on the band, have enough tension on the band to make it worthwhile, placing your wrist and forearm onto something stable. It can be a desk or a chair, doesn't matter what it is, just find what works for you. But we want enough resistance so that when you bend your wrist backwards and then curl your wrist all the way up, trying to shorten that muscular tissue, that you feel like it is reasonable enough to fatigue you. Because again, if we don't find fatigue with this exercise, your brain doesn't realize that it wasn't good enough to perform the exercise correctly and is less likely to modify itself overnight when you go to sleep to come back stronger than what it was before. So traditional strength training principles, 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 12, making sure that it's just your forearm and your wrist that's moving. It can be easy to turn this into a bicep exercise without thinking about it. Lock your forearm in, let your wrist go all the way down as far as it can. If you have hand weights or something like that, you can also come all the way down and let your fingers curl down as well. It just adds a little bit more range to the exercise, it incorporates different muscle groups, broader muscle groups than just doing the wrists specifically. But we want to make sure that you feel that fatigue, get that muscle pump, go to sleep, recover, that you can keep repeating that and progressing it as you feel you can. So ultimately, once you have found ways to mobilize and strengthen those tight forearms, the last thing that we need to talk about is potentially the most important, but also probably the least interesting and least sexy of all of these things. Because if you've found that there's a very specific part of your neck and upper back that when you mobilize them, you instantly feel looser through your tight forearm muscles, then we need to understand why have they become stiff, tight, and restricted in the first place. And if you've been following these videos and the channel as a whole, you'll understand that for me, clinically as a physiotherapist, the single biggest reason why specific parts of your spine become stiff, tight, and restricted is often a direct reflection of the shapes and the postures that you put that tissue into the most throughout the day. A great way to think about this is if you were to logically list every single thing that you did from the moment that you woke up to the moment that you went to sleep, every single day for a week, and you were to categorize them and then list them from the most common to the least common, we want to pay attention to the positions and the shapes that you are in while you do the things you do the most often. And as it turns out for a lot of people in my lived experience, is it often tends to be a reflection of the stationary, static, often sitting-based shapes that we get into. And again, to list them off, things like sitting at your desk working on a computer or a laptop, sitting down using your phone, reading a book, doing arts and crafts, playing an instrument. It can be standing, looking down, cooking or preparing something. If you had to walk around all day, but you're also looking at your feet the whole time, we're really interested in where the hinges go in your spine to directly prompt your tissue to become stiffer, tighter, and more restricted. And it goes without saying that if you don't then try and find ways to get yourself out of those shapes and into better anatomical positions or better postures, then all the work mobilizing your spine, freeing up those tight forearms, freeing up any stiffness in your wrist, and strengthening those wrist muscles may ultimately be for literally nothing if you don't then put the original issue into a better position. So if you are ever going to get to the stage where you feel you've permanently loosened tight forearm muscles, you need to care about the postures and the shapes that you put your spine into the most throughout the day. That may sound strange considering your forearms all the way down here and your neck and upper back is all the way up here, but clinically there is a direct connection between those two areas. So ultimately, I genuinely hope that that was helpful and insightful. If it was, please let me know by leaving a comment down below. If you did enjoy the video, leave a like rating. Please subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this type of content and you want to see more in the future. Please consider leaving a super thanks donation if you want to help support me and the channel. But as always, I sincerely hope that that was helpful and I hope to see you next time.